Okay. All right. So, you guys, welcome to session 2 of day 1 pre-service. We had a great session this morning. Lots of good questions, lots of good information. I don't see anybody from National on board. We did have a couple this morning. So I'm going to get right to it. If you guys have questions, please use the chat to put your questions in, and Q and I are watching that and making sure that everybody's getting in. See there's Wanda. And so we will also get your questions to Tanera. So I'm going to introduce our trainer today. It's Tanera Bailey. She is with the Sissy group. Can't ever
Very
say
good,
that
Carol.
right. But this group has been contracted with AARP to provide training for all of the affiliates and all of their tutors. So she has been busy providing training for new tutors and returning tutors. So just think you guys will be returning next year, and this will be a piece of cake for you. So I'm going to turn it over to Tanera. We thank her for coming in today, and you guys enjoy. I will have a copy of this in a PDF file in the shared drive. So you guys feel free to take notes, but just know that the copy of the screens will be in the shared drive. So because there's some really good information in here today. All right, Miss Tanera.
Thanks, Carol. I need to be made a co-host so that I can
Oh, yes,
share.
you do.
And hi, everyone. It's great to be with you this afternoon. We did have a great conversation this morning. And like she said, I'm Tanera Bailey, and we work a lot with the startup project. So I've worked with Peggy Goldberg, who is your field service associate at AARP Foundation, for the last probably about 5 years, supporting new and startup programs in new affiliates. And so though I've done this training several times, as Carol said, and supported projects for several years, you are our first completely virtual startup. So I'm excited to learn from you and to see how this year goes as you take on the challenge of doing this a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Give me a second. Great. And just move this out and get the chat. Great. So we are on Zoom, as you all know, and I'd love to be able to see faces. It makes it easier than talking to the black boxes. So if you don't mind, turn on your camera and keep it on through the full session, but still stay muted. There may be some time at the end where we can open the mics or allow you to chat with me directly. But if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in the chat box. As Carol said, she and Q are monitoring it for me, and I'll make some pauses throughout to answer questions when they happen. And there might be some times where there are questions that we won't get to today because I know they're in the agenda for tomorrow. So no, we will get to all questions that you have, but I might balance that with the content that we're sharing. So all of you should have had a chance to do the asynchronous on-demand course. So that gave you a bit of a foundation of what to expect today. We're going to dive deeper into the history and reason for the focus on fluency, and to show you a little bit of what it looks like in the virtual setting versus the in-person setting, which is what you saw in the course. But to give me a sense of how you all are feeling, why don't you go ahead and put in the chat how you feel about virtual tutoring? Are you anxious? Are you excited? Are you comfortable? You can put a 1, 2, 3. You can type the words, either one. But just see how we're starting out. And hopefully, for those of you that may have a 1, we can get you down to a 2 or 3 by the end of the day. All right, good. I'm starting at an easy place. Most of you are excited. A little bit of anxiousness from Victoria. Great. All right, this will make it easy because excitement I can do. It's easier to continue that, hopefully. And hopefully for any of you who are feeling a little bit anxious, I'll answer the questions and we'll go from there. So I do want to give you a little bit of foundation on AARP Foundation and the Experience Core program. So the program is an evidence-based volunteer support literacy program. It helps children become great readers by the end of the third grade while enriching the lives of volunteers. So there's this dual purpose. There's the increase of literacy and knowledge for young people in support of schools that have this need. And there's also this engagement and enrichment and activation of older adults in service and connecting to those two generations together to meet this need around education. So the focus of the program is dual. It's not just about the kids, it's not just about the adults, it's about the two of them coming together and making magic. We target schools that are high needs. So these are schools that have over large classrooms, that have under-resourced schools who have a significant portion of their K-3 students that are reading below grade level. And that way, this intervention can really address some of those deficiencies and the challenges that we see in our public and charter schools for students getting on grade level with their reading. We also use, and you all have seen some information about, a very specific structure and focus. And that is using an evidence-based model where we look at the increasing the overall reading ability of students by focusing just on fluency, this ability to speak and read accurately and the way that we speak. And a little bit of that comes to comprehension skills, but our focus is all on fluency. And so I'll talk today about why that is and how the methodology and the structure helps to increase and improve the outcomes that we want to see in our students. So we've surveyed tutors that have participated in the program that you're about to engage in, and we have great feedback from the majority of tutors about their skills that they've mastered and gained through this exposure. So many of you may be parents or grandparents or have young people in your life, and so now after being a tutor with Experience Corps, they have better knowledge of kind of how you learn to read and how kids master and understand literacy and what it means to be a fluent and good reader. There's this opportunity for them to expand their social networks. They meet friends and people they may not have crossed paths with in their day-to-day lives, especially after not working or being retired, being able to expand the people that they interact with and have a regular social group. They stay physically and mentally active. Anytime you interact with a child, they push those critical thinking. They bring out additional ways that you have to think to answer questions and to stay engaged. And so we have found that our volunteers stay more physically and mentally active by participating in the program. They make a difference in their communities. Like I said, we're targeting schools that have a very high need, and those schools need volunteers. They need people who are paying attention to their young people. And so we know that by connecting volunteers with Experience Corps to the young people and to the schools that we work with, we are seeing an impact in those communities. You're then able to share your knowledge and experience, whether you've come from education or working in the teaching field or any other career. This is a great chance to be able to share some of that experience, that knowledge, even just your love of reading with the next generation. And many of our volunteers said that they had an increased sense of purpose. You will see at the end of several weeks of tutoring the aha, the kid who was stumbling through the sentences and reading very staccato, all of a sudden they're reading fluently, they're reading better, they're catching on faster. And so you know that since reading is such a core part of all the other parts of your academic journey, that you make a difference by helping that young person to master that skill. We also have done research and looked at what this does for students. So you are part of a volunteer corps that is serving over 30,000 students across the country, and 200,000 or more volunteers are doing exactly what you're learning how to do today. And we've seen that there is an impact of these results from this service. So about 75% of our students experience some progress from the beginning to the end of the year. So we know that throughout learning, students aren't always going up. But we see that most of our students increase their skills and their knowledge from when they start with us and when they end. 50% achieve a year reading level or more of progress. So all of our students, when they're identified, are usually reading below grade level. So at least they catch up to their grade level or more 50% of the time. And 40% of the time, they at least read on or above grade level at the end of the year. So we know that we're making a difference in the majority of the students that we work with, and that it's specifically because of the structure of the intervention that we can measure and know that outcome. So today's conversation, we're going to focus on what does it mean to read fluently, what is fluency, and why this structure that you've heard so much about is important. What do we learn or see by people following this particular model? We're going to briefly go over the fluency reading games, and we'll talk a little bit about the 30-minute structure and what it looks like breaking down. When we look at the goal of these trainings, we want to make sure that you're equipped with the strategies and information you need to build students' skills. So you will understand that if I do X, they will gain more vocabulary. If I do this, they'll get more fluent. This will help them with those tricky words they were stumbling on. This will give them more practice. You will understand each aspect of our program and what it might do for the young people that you are working with. We're going to review and look at the research because our program is research-based, and we're going to focus on why fluency practice and the way that we have modeled this intervention. If we keep with that style and fidelity to the program, we will achieve the best results. And so I'll explain to you not only what it means to be fluent, but how you pay attention to that and why we've chosen the particular games, the particular 30 minutes, the way that we structure the time. All of that will be explained from the research base. Because you are going to be doing this online, we'll also outline the difference in the timing and the expectations around the virtual structured tutoring session. You were able to see the excuse me, on-demand, in-person in the on-demand course, but we'll show you some videos I know you have had access to, but we'll dive into them individually, looking at what the virtual tutoring session looks like and what to expect when you are online with the student you're working with. You all have probably seen this structure in slides or in information, but this is the session structure. 3 minutes for opening, about 24 minutes of skill building activities, which includes fluency games, review and reflection, and the tutor read aloud. And then lastly, a closing of about 3 minutes for a total of 30 minutes altogether. Our goal in training is to give you that confidence to conduct this session by looking at the goals and the processes for each aspect of this structured session, so that at the end of the 2 days, you're looking just like this little smiley face, ready to go and encourage. I'm sorry. I'm losing my voice from speaking earlier. We'll also give you some hints. You never know what to expect with young people sometimes. And so we want to give you tips on managing behavior, encouraging students, how to support them in this virtual setting, because it is different than maybe you have done any other type of volunteering before. And also the children themselves are in a virtual setting for school. Most of the time. And so we want to make sure that you're able to support and understand some of the experiences that they're having in this new environment. So to begin with, I'd like to ask, and hopefully you all will remember, what is the skill building part 1 focus of our tutoring session? Is it A, teaching students to read, B, comprehension, or C, fluency? Go ahead and type that in the chat box, what you think is the focus of our tutoring session. I've said it a couple of times, so I'm hoping everybody was paying attention. All right, everybody was. Obviously, you all are ready to listen and engage, so I feel good about proceeding. So you all have seen this graphic in the on-demand course and probably in your manual. There are 5 building blocks to literacy, and we know that they all contribute to reading proficiency, whether that's decoding and identifying beginning sounds, and then the practice that we focus on, synonyms and definitions, or even the comprehension and deriving meaning from the text. We are going to focus in that space right on practice, because it's that bridge in between the skills that they're learning from their teacher and the comprehension that you need when you're learning more. We see fluency as important because it's helps you to read like you speak. The example that I like to give is thinking about mastering a language. So most of us might have taken a language in school, maybe high school or college. You studied, many of us took lessons, but we're not necessarily fluent. And if you think about how you speak when you're not fluent in a language, you're very staccato. You may know words, you may know some vocabulary, but you may not know how to combine them in a sentence to actually make sense to people. It's not something that someone can always understand you, or that you can always understand them. This is the same for our young readers. When they are trying to read, not being able to be fluent stops them from being able to comprehend, for them to be able to take maybe those vocabulary and sight words that they know and turn them into something that makes sense. And so fluency is this bridge between word recognition, I know all these words from a vocabulary search, and comprehension. And I put those words into an order that makes sentences, paragraphs, and stories. And so if you are fluent, you are reading. If you're not fluent, you're not reading. And the same might be true if you know a little bit of Spanish and you can pick up a few words here or there. You can maybe communicate a little, but you're not fluent in the way that you can communicate and share ideas and understand ideas in a language. That's the same for our young readers. And you want to think about that reading in that language acquisition space. So because we know that fluency is this bridge to comprehension, and it's actually one of the things that is really hard for schools to offer is practice, just because we have large class sizes, limited teaching time, and just kids at varying different levels in the classroom experience. This is why we focus like a laser on just this fluency rather than all these other aspects of reading. And fluency is the ability to read text accurately and quickly. Or another way to think about it is the ability to read text accurately and as you naturally speak. The same way as you would think about fluency in a language acquisition. It's the ability to read those words in another language and be able to understand it. And then when you speak at the natural speaking rate so people can understand you as well. So we know that there are ways to increase reading fluency. And if you remember in the on-demand course and in your manual, there's that National Reading Panel research that shows all the ways to improve reading proficiency. And so when it comes to fluency, there are two ways to increase that. One is by having students repeatedly read passages as you offer guidance. There's two aspects to that skill that are super important. One is the repetition, having them read it over and over and over and over again. And the second is the guidance. It's not just having the practice, but having someone to correct, to make sure that it's accurate, to make sure that they're saying things and reading things the way they're supposed to be. And so if you think about any time you've tried to master a skill, whether it's a hobby or something that you do even in your work, you start out practicing and you might do simple things. If I'm learning to play the piano, I'm going to play the same chord over and over and over until I can do it without even thinking about it. And I have that automaticity where it happens whether I think about it or not. All of us that can read, we have that. It doesn't matter if I've seen that text before, or I've read it before, I can automatically read those passages and read pretty accurately. You provide that guidance as the tutor. So in our classrooms across the country, you might have 30, 40 kids in that school at all different levels of instruction. And so often what happens is the teacher will pair up students to read to each other. And we know that practice makes permanent. So a child who is reading poorly and paired with another student is just going to continue practicing poor reading. It's that guidance where you can say, nope, that word is increase. Can you say increase for me? Increase. Great. Now start over the sentence. You can provide the guide that tells them when they're accurate or inaccurate in their reading, and you can give them that chance to practice and listen with someone who knows what good reading sounds like. The other part is providing models of fluent reading. So there's the practice and then there's modeling. And because you know how to read, you can show to the student how how to accurately read, how to fluently read. So with our game Echo Reading, which is the game that you always start with first, you start out by modeling good reading for your student. And this gives them a chance to hear what it's supposed to sound like, hear it at a natural speaking rate, and to continue to model that behavior. So you want to think about it in two ways. It's the repetition and practice with guidance, and then the model of fluent reading. So in our structured session, we have, as I mentioned, the opening and closing, but the majority of the session is on skill building activities, with almost the huge chunk is in that fluency games, the 12 to 15 minutes. You'll also have review and reflection, which is a lot about comprehension, helping the student connect what they read to their understanding, and then that modeling that comes from the tutor read aloud. All of those skill building activities are embedded in what we know helps young people read. So before we jump into the next session, I want to see if there's any questions that come or came up about the background and why we focus on fluency. Go ahead and write that in the chat. I'm going to just take a quick sip of my tea while you might be doing that. Hopefully I'll stop choking. And then next, we're going to talk about the social emotional learning piece. I don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good to go. If you do have something, feel free to type it and I'll try to get to it in a minute. So we're at some unprecedented times. Many of us did not expect to be not only tutoring virtually, but just kind of living still through this pandemic and the many situations that our country is in. And that is true for our students as well. And so I do want to give you a little bit of an understanding of some of the social emotional pieces that you might see and how to best support those students through this time. So you want to think about the fact that school for these students is very different, and dealing with school closure can be a huge challenge. I have a first grader who started his kindergarten year last year and went to school in March and has not been back since. And to him, he doesn't even yet quite understand what school is because he had just gotten in there. For some of your students, they will also have this experience. They're first grade, second grade, they barely got into the public school system, and now they're in this environment that's very different. And so understanding that the structure and the systems, and a big part of being a child is the everyday of going to school and interacting and knowing my teacher, and that's their job. That's just like we have our jobs. And so they're trying to figure out, who am I? What am I doing? What is school when it's in my house and it's on this computer? All of those things play into it. I know some of your students may end up being back in the school and you will still be tutoring them, but it's still not the same school that we left in March or April of last year. And so one of the things that can be really helpful for our students is structure. The more that it is consistent, I know on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to see Miss Bailey for 30 minutes and we're going to read and she's going to listen to me. And if nothing else is normal in my world, I know that 30 minutes, those 2 times a week, are that. And so you want to think about that you don't have to create magic to make this give a student a peace of mind or a sense of security. It's literally just doing the thing that they can expect every time they see you. Having something that isn't changing, isn't ongoing madness would be really helpful. And so you'll explain the structure to them, you'll explain the games to them, you'll explain how often they come and see you, and all of that will give them a sense of support and expectation, because they know, hey, if Tuesday at 9 o'clock, I will see you. Tuesday at 9 o'clock, I will get 30 minutes of your undivided attention. And particularly for students that are probably dealing with parents and family members who are juggling life, wherever that might be, work and life, or outside of the home and life, that focus on our kids has not been as easy. The other thing is you can use very simple mindfulness techniques, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, to engage and redirect them. So sometimes the kids, because of being online all day, they just need a little bit of redirection or a moment to be present. And so I'll show you a few very quick techniques that you can use to engage them. Sometimes for tutors, we'll see kind of bad or behavior issues with students, and we're thinking, well, they just don't want to come to tutoring, they don't really like us, it's some other issue. You may see any of these behaviors, whether it's selective forgetting, or they're just not paying attention, they're looking behind you and around you, or they're complaining, oh, my tummy hurts, or I have to go potty 18 million times, or aggressiveness, or they don't want to hang up with you, they no, can we extend the session for more time, I need more time. All of these things are responses to trauma and stress, and have very little to do with you as a tutor or them not liking the experience of tutoring. This is a very unexpected time, and something I've heard from a lot of my counselor friends and other social workers who work with students is that sometimes that we take it out on our safe place. And so the fact that you're there every week and you're consistent and you're nice, I'm just trying to cause disruption. And so if you start to see some of these experiences, you should let Carol or Q know, or anyone else on your program kind of know if it's consistent and problematic. I will say that most of what I've seen for our little kids, they just love the attention. They love that they know for 30 minutes, I'm going to get to be with this person who's just caring about me and my reading. So I have not seen this to be a big problem, even in our current situation, because the structure is so consistent, and consistency is what they're begging for. But we do want to let you know, because we recognize that this is kind of a traumatic and unexpected time. There's also, beyond just the social piece and the emotional piece of being out of school and closed, there's also just the challenges of being at home and trying to learn. So you have parents who may interrupt or interject or not be paying attention or not sure what to do with a small child and the computer. You might have siblings who are the primary caretaker because a parent is an essential worker or just back to work outside of the home. And so you have a 12-year-old responsible for a 7-year-old, and they're not really helping or getting things together for you. It might just be the unstructured setting rather than at school where they have their desk and they have their supplies and everyone sits and moves and does things at a set time. They're kind of eating breakfast in the afternoon. They're in their PJs. They don't have all their school supplies. They may not have all their learning resources. Many of our kids, particularly in our more high need schools, are coming from poverty. And though the program is going to do their best to get them everything that they need, by the middle of the school year, you'd be surprised how much school supplies just magically disappear. And so some of the things that would be available, they just won't have. And then you just have the natural distractions of home, pets, dogs, technology that these children are also having. And so one of the things that will be explained to parents, will be explained to teachers, and you should just re-emphasize, is that we want to minimize distractions. So they should go to a designated space for schoolwork with you. They should find a hard surface to put the computer or laptop or tablet on. And I think with our little kids, sometimes it may or may not be the comfortable supportive chair. I was doing this training for Boston, and they are using digital books. And so they had a few different recordings to show the kids interacting with their volunteers. And many of the children were in their bed talking through this, or put the computer on the ground and they sat on the ground and looked at it. You have to remember, in their schools nowadays, they're not sitting at desks all day like maybe I did. They move to centers and they sit on the floor and they dance. And so they're much more movement based. And so for them, they might learn best with the computer on the ground and laying on their tummy and talking to you. If they're engaged, it's okay. You just don't want them holding the computer and putting you on a roller coaster as they sit and talk and move and dance with the computer and as they read. You all are lucky that you and all of your students will get headsets. And so you want to make sure that they have those, that they use that, and that it helps to cut down on distractions. So these are just things you'll review. They will get this information, but you should plan to kind of make sure, hey, do you have all of the things you need when you come to tutoring? And it's really important that we find a place that you can sit. If you do have a student who has an emotional response, you just want to listen as much as you can. You want to validate their feelings, be honest. And then again, like I said, sometimes they take it out because you're their safe space. So just reassure that, yep, I understand that today's just not a really good day. You're kind of not in a good mood, but I will be back on Thursday and we can try this again. Letting them know that you're going to listen and talk less. If you notice anything severe or alarming, you feel like it's more than just a bad day, it's something more, please let Carol or Q know. You want to let your program staff know. You don't have to figure out how to handle anything that feels outside of your scope, and you'll receive excuse me, support from them as you navigate through those things. You want to try with our children to have as much as possible empathetic listening, particularly in the opening and closing. When it's the structure, you're going to focus on the tutoring, but when they're sharing things about what's going on in their life, trying to figure out how to support them. So that's listening without interrupting, being aware of your tone and body language. I have a habit in my desk, how my chair is set up, of sitting back and crossing my arms when I'm listening. For adults, they know that that's really focused. For kids, it seems I'm a little upset. So uncrossing, leaning in so they can see that I'm paying attention can all make it seem like I'm more engaged with what they have to say. Asking open-ended questions, using reflective language. I hear that you're really upset that your mommy didn't let you play with that toy, but sometimes when we're in school, we can't do that. Using their words back. And then sometimes be willing to sit in the discomfort. You might have to hear about their puppy 18 million times, or you might have to see something that you're not necessarily that interested in, or they might have to talk through some things before they're ready to do the lesson. You don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but you do want them to know that, again, you're a place that they can count on, that there's some consistency, and they can tell things to you. There is an aspect of mentoring to this work as well. So one of the things that I think can be really helpful for kids who need to be redirected or refocused on the work can be mindfulness, which is just being present and paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, bodily sensations, and the surrounding environment, and can be used in a variety of situations. So I'm going to show you one that you can use with the kiddo who's maybe kind of all over the place, to just recenter them and get them to calm down a little bit. It's called a 3-4-5 breath. So I'm going to have you breathe in for 3 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 5. I'm going to count for you. So go ahead, breathe in 1, 2, 3, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, 5. Takes no time. Let's try it one more time. Breathe in, 2, 3, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, 5. And so for a student who's kind of, high energy, just doing that activity makes them pay attention to their breath, makes them stay quiet for a minute, and that might be just enough to snap them back to attention. So you could do that in between games. You might do that between opening and fluency games. If they're struggling when you're doing review and reflection, it can be just an activity. If you have kids like my kiddo who are very kinetic learners and want to dance and tell you everything with movement, having just a quick stretch break can be all they need to reconnect to the activity. So I've seen teachers doing things like raise the roof once you're done after that little session. And so they play the game. Okay, we're going to raise the roof after we're done. Yeah, you did great. Let's go back to it. Or, hey, we're going to stand up and do one jumping jack after the game, and then we'll go back to it. If they just need that moment to stop the fidgets or to just pay attention, movement can be a great way for them to do that. And then you might have them just be still and listen for 15 seconds, tell you what they hear. I think in houses that have a lot going on, this could be a distraction nightmare and just make them pay attention to something that's going on in their home that you don't want them to. One way to do this to get them to focus into the computer is to say, I'm going to give you 15 seconds. Tell me what you hear in my home, and see if they can pay attention and hear, you know, your cat or your refrigerator or your laundry. That it focuses them into being here and being present to what's on the screen. Thinking about things like that. You just want to, it shouldn't be a huge piece. And I don't even think you're going to need this a ton. I did not see that in programs across the country that did implement the virtual tutoring over the summer, that they needed this a ton. But I do think sometimes for kids that have been online all day and then come to this type of activity, having some of these things in your pocket just in case is always good. So we want to think about the benefits of mindfulness. It improves intention, emotional regulation, greater compassion. For our students who are experiencing a ton of stress and trauma through the change and chaos of what they're seeing, it can serve as just a quick reduction of stress and anxiety, particularly things around breath or paying attention to their breath. And so you will get this cute little bookmark, which you can use as a resource and just kind of have sitting by. If you notice, I think he might need a little bit of a focusing break, you can pick one of those to do. I will say that this should be a small, quick transition. This should not be a full-on yoga session or some other type of activity where you spend the whole time breathing and meditating. This is just a quick redirection break and then back to the structure and the session. Because like I said, most of that will provide them with the consistency that they're wanting. And so if you just stick with what you're expected to do, that may be enough. So any questions about mindfulness before we jump into the overview and kind of thinking about the big picture? You guys are going to make my afternoon easy. This is great. All right, reflections. We're going to think about the big picture, starting with the overview. I do want to give you a few answers to kind of frequently asked questions that we get. Since the research said there were 5 focus areas, can we help with other skills as well? This, I'm talking to my teachers, my reading specialists, all of you educators out there. I know that you are experts and have gotten many children to read, but I want you to just focus on this intervention. And the reason is because we can't speak to the fidelity of the program. And when we're evaluating the intervention and wanting to say that, yes, funder, we should be able to do this in other schools, or yes, pay for us to continue this program, we can't speak to that if you use some other skill than what you have been trained to do in this program. The other piece is that we don't want to connect or do something different than what their classroom teacher is doing and create any confusion. Not that your method won't get them to reading, we just don't want them to then get into school and be like, I'm not sure who I'm supposed to be paying attention to. So you might have tips and tricks, don't use them in this setting. Think about what we're talking about, fluency, and try your best to just listen and let them practice. As many of you who have worked in education know, finding time to sit for 30 minutes uninterrupted with a child in your classroom by themselves never happens. And so that's the benefit. That's what you're providing. Yes, you could teach them phonemic awareness and vocabulary and decoding, and you could get them to read, but they will not get anyone who will be able to sit with them and listen to them read and practice outside of you. So focus on that. When we're talking about this accuracy or reading quickly, which is more important? Of course, it's accuracy. And it shouldn't be reading quickly or not wanting them to speed read. It's you want them to read like they speak. And so we talked in the morning session about kids who are English language learners. And for English language learners, they're taking in what you're saying in English, they're translating it to their native tongue, then they're thinking of the response in their native tongue and then translating it into English and then saying it to you. So all of that takes a minute. So they might speak a little bit more slowly, naturally. And so if a child is accurate, but they're reading at a pace that's a little bit slower because they're doing that translation loop every single time for a while, but that's how they speak, then they're probably pretty close to fluent. You want to pay attention to that accuracy, and it should sound like exactly like if they were telling you something. And that's where the opening can come in. You know what they're like. When I'm talking about something I normally know and I don't have to think about it, how do I sound? What is the pattern of my speech? You want them to read in that same way. And in the tutor read aloud, you may not get through the whole book. So why do we have to read just a part of the book to the student? Whoever is doing the reading is doing the most work. So though you are to model fluent reading to the child, this is really about practice. And so we want the bulk of the session to be them reading, them practicing, going over the text multiple times, getting that repeated guidance. And so if you spend 20 minutes reading to them, they're going to love it, but it's not going to give them any chance to practice. So sometimes you might spend 20, 25 minutes, almost the full session on them practicing, and you may only get to read 2 or 3 pages of the tutor reading loud. It's okay. It's not a negative thing. It's great that you get to model it, but ultimately we want them to have the most time to be practicing. So don't worry if it takes you a little while to get through a pretty basic picture book. All right. So we're going to jump into the opening, which is the first part of the session. What would you say describes the 3-minute opening activities? Is it connecting with the students, reviewing the structure, rules, and expectations, setting a goal for the session, or 4, all of the above? Put your number choice in the chat. All right, great. Victoria is fast. She got in there with that 4 and is accurate. Great. I see all of you are paying attention. We might be able to end early because you're so on top of it. We're going to start with Owen and Alicia, who I know many of you have seen. One of the things you will see these clips again, and I'll point out some best practices, some things they could improve or change. And so let's give Owen and Alicia a view. If you can hear it.
Did you get your package yesterday?
It's right behind.
Can I see it?
Can you all hear?
Is it?
Good.
Yeah, 1 second.
Can you hold it up to the camera? Oh, sorry.
1 second.
Sure.
It actually has a trailer, so I have to like lift 2
Oh.
parts at a time.
Okay.
A little boat trailer.
You know what? You're frozen, so tap your screen a little bit, please.
Is that good?
Nope, you're still frozen. There you go. Okay, move it over a little bit. Oh, very cool.
And with this is kind of long.
So those are Legos?
Yeah, it's a Lego boat, trailer, and truck.
That is very cool. Did it come put together or did you put it together?
Me, I put it together.
Already? You did that already?
No, it was yesterday.
But you did that in one day. That's amazing.
Uh-huh. It was
Pretty
like
special.
in the afternoon.
Wow. Well, you are a hard worker. You stuck with a brand new thing. Congratulations. So can you hear me pretty well, Owen, with your headset?
Yeah.
Good.
And do you see this little thing on there? That's the speaker.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Because you're a little louder today, so
Yeah.
that's what we needed to do, was you needed to turn that up a little bit. So
Mhm.
that's good.
All right. So my first word of warning, do not send any of these children to go find you something in their home. You will have every skill that you need yelling at them to come back to the computer. So she took a risk. She was lucky that it was right behind him and she did not lose him to his home. But as someone who has a first grader, if he has to show Granny and Papa something he wants to see, it takes him 40 minutes to bring it back to the FaceTime. So my suggestion is, if students want to share something in the opening, part of it is, okay, well, when you come tomorrow, make sure that it's sitting right next to you so that you can show it to me quickly before we jump into reading. Don't have them leave where they're sitting, because that can be a challenge. She did talk about Owen's headset, which I think is really important, making sure that he could hear and see her. You'll hear later on with some of the videos, he's really low. And so she knows that he can control the volume. So I would address that with him. But you can also tell that they have an established relationship. This is not their first meeting, because she already knew about his gift. He kind of already had some rapport with her. And so it does not take these children very long. They're used to meeting new people and interacting with adults. And so going through maybe 1 or 2 icebreakers in the first or second session, by the third session, they know everything and are ready to go, and the expectation. So you want to focus in this space on connecting, again, reviewing the structure and the expectation, and then setting a goal with the student for what you're going to complete during that day. You're going to welcome the student, check on their volume and video. If they're having trouble hearing you or seeing you, you're going to play with that for a little while until you can hear them, they can hear you pretty good. If you have contact issues, the child, one of the questions we got in the morning was what to do if the child doesn't show up. Give them about 15 minutes. It can be hard when you're trying to wrangle a small child to get them where they need to be at the right time. And so it may just be that they're having trouble with the internet or logging in, or, you know, they're finishing up with school, whatever that might be. So give them about 15 minutes before you just call the session. If you can get a hold of Carol or Q or a teacher or a contact person and say that the child has not shown up, they might be able to find someone to connect with them. You want them to make sure that they're in a quiet place with no distractions. You could hear in Owen's household people moving around. They may not be able to get in a completely quiet room. They're going to do the best they can. So it would be best if you make sure that you're in a completely quiet room. Tell family members, people who might interrupt you, hey, I'm going to be tutoring for the next hour. Please limit your distractions, because all it takes is someone walking behind you for them to stop reading and say, hey, who's that person in the screen? You want to think a little bit about children's learning style. And for some children, they might be able to catch things just through hearing them. But for some students, they are more visual. So when you get to the point where you're asking them about their tricky words or more challenging words, they may just be able to say, oh, I think it's the word 3 paragraphs down, starts with a P, or 3rd line down, starts with a P, or they might hold it up and point to it and say, I don't know where this is. They do in schools for their online learning often have to show whiteboards or written work to the screen. So they'll probably try to show you in that way. And so you want to be mindful of showing things to students who are more visual and may not be able to just pick up the cues of what you're asking through the auditory. So like showing the pages that you're going to read before you jump into them. You might also have a keyword or a phrase for we need to focus back, whether it's, okay, let's keep our eyes on the screen, or let's get to attention, so that they know that, okay, now we're going to get ready to read, or now we're going to focus on what we're going to do. You can think about that and know you'll learn your student. You'll be surprised how much you know about how they learn best, what you can do and what you can't do with them as the weeks progress. You want to set goals. The student should understand what we mean by we're focusing on fluency. You'll hear Owen says later on that it's reading smoothly. They may not define it as accurately and speaking at a natural rate, but they can figure out some way to understand what fluent speaking means. I read just like I talk. And you're going to talk about what your job is and what their job is. My job is to listen to you and help you, guide you, and to show you what it means to be a good reader. Your job is to try 100% and to practice to become more fluent. You want to remind them of that so that when they're struggling or when you provide praise, you can do it based upon the goals that you've established. So we're going to take a quick break. we're running a little bit early, which is good. You guys don't have a ton of questions this afternoon, crew. So we're going to take 10 minutes. We'll come back just a little bit after 3, like 3:01, 3:02, and jump into the afternoon session. I will answer Sue's question when we return. So do not log out. Just turn off your camera, mute your audio, and take your break. All right, welcome back. We're gonna go ahead and jump in. Let me kind of see if most people are back. Seems so. A few people. Hopefully everyone was able to grab a snack and have a quick minute. And we'll jump back into the content. So we're going to talk more now about the skill building activities. Of course, tomorrow we'll go into a deep dive of each of the games, but just to give you a frame around what the expectation is with this section. So you're going to use leveled readers and materials, leveled meaning that each level increases in difficulty. And so we use Reading A to Z as our reading curriculum, which has decodable books to level T. And these books, like I say, they increase in difficulty. So you might have a first grader who has a book that only has maybe one sentence on each page. And then when you get into your second and third grade books, there's paragraphs and much more complicated words and commas and periods to make it more of a reading journey for them. Again, for all of us, practice is the key, not getting through all the books. So each student may be different. You might have 2 second graders, and one of them, you have a book that does, if you take away the cover page and the table of contents and the index, has 16 pages of text, which you will use for your practice. And every session, they can handle 4 pages, and you do 4 pages, 4 pages, 4 pages. In 2 weeks, you're through that book. You might have another student who the very first session, you do 4 pages and they struggle and they're not fluent. And so the second session, you go down to 3 pages and they're still not fluent. So then you go down to 2 pages and they're still not fluent. And so you might go to 1, and that student might only be able to do 1 page at a time every single session. They need that much practice in order to get through the text at a level of fluency. They need more time, more miles on the tongue, as a way of saying that. You want to give them that opportunity. You don't want to rush through the book. It's not about, oh, we only have so many weeks to get through this. It's learning and paying attention and adjusting your pacing based upon how they're doing. And so the goal is to give them more opportunities to practice more of the text, to get more fluent, accurate, and reading in the way that they speak by the end of the session. And so if in 4 pages, when you listen to them, they still don't sound like they speak, you want to decrease the number of pages in the next session to give them more practice and to give them more opportunities. If they're doing pretty good by the end of the session, you would move on.
Hey, Thanair.
So, yes.
We never got to Sue's question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sue was asking, will the school talk to parents about it's 30 minutes and maybe try to provide a quiet environment for them? So ideally, and what will happen, all the parents will sign a permission slip and say what they're agreeing to, and understand that the student needs to be ready, prepared with all their supplies for their 30-minute session. I will say that we want to be conscious of some of the differences that might be in our schools and in our homes for children. And so not everyone's parent is going to be home with them while they're learning. Not everyone has a caring adult in their life to be able to do some of the extra work with them, or they might have a parent that's working, and so they're under the support of a sibling, like I mentioned earlier. And teenagers don't necessarily have the same cares as their parents do, and so they might just put little brother in a room and hope he does the best he can.
Are we allowed to talk to other people in the room, or just to the
parents or
the babysitter or the teenager?
It depends on the circumstances. I wouldn't say get your mother for me in that situation. If it's something where the student is misbehaving or you just need to manage their behavior, I would end the session, talk to the program staff, and the program staff should work with the teacher to handle that. If it's something where it's like, we can't hear you, get an adult to push the button, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
often I know with my first grader, I'm in the beginning of the session and then I walk away. We don't want parents sitting next to the child because that will change the session. You want the parent to leave them alone, like Owen is left alone, just like he would be in school, unless he needs help. So the first session, when you're just getting oriented, you might have a parent that sits next to them and kind of wants to understand and make sure that they have everything they need, and that is fine. But the long-term session should be that child taking ownership, having their book, having their materials, and sitting down, even if that means a teenager or a friend or a babysitter helps them get set up. And then through the session, they work with you. They learn how to, and they should be okay for the most part. If they're not, that might be something to mention to the program staff, because that child may not be the best fit for this program, or their home environment may not be the best fit for this program. That does not mean that just because a child one day doesn't have all their supplies, or doesn't always have a highlighter, or doesn't always have a pencil, that they shouldn't be in the program. We do want to recognize that kids come from a lot of different homes. And so not always is there someone who will get them established in the same way that we would like. But for the most part, I've seen from programs that this has not been a huge concern, that most of the kids are where they're supposed to be and engaged in the process. Yeah, so we're going to talk about starting level. Shannon asked, do all students start at the same book? And who determines the starting level? They will be, Carol, I don't know if you want to speak about this further. Are you starting with the age, the grade level, or are you picking based upon the teacher's scores?
We know the kids have been assessed, but we have not heard anything about what level they're supposed to start at. So we are prepared to start at the grade level with them, and then we can adjust as needed if we need to.
Great. So there's a chart in your manual. I can tell
Page
you.
30.
Okay, thank you. Page 30 in your manual has a nice little chart. And so you will be told what grade your student is, and you will start at the first book in that level. And so there's a little bit of overlap. So if you're a first grader, you're actually starting in some of the books that are kindergarten, end of kindergarten year. Second graders are starting at books that would normally be the end of the first grade year, so that they are starting. It may still be a stretch, but we know that they're behind a level. So there's a little bit of growth in the beginning, and then they get into their grade level based reading. You will have 2 nonfiction books per level, and you should finish both books before moving on. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit more. And I saw, Lee and Bobby, your question about the monitor as part of the training. We are going to talk about that tomorrow. And I can be happy to answer any questions then if you feel like we're not getting to it. But there will always be a tutor, a monitor, and the student in each session. 2 adults, 1 child. So you're going to identify between 2 and 4 pages when you start a book. If you are not counting the cover page, the table of contents, or any index or glossary. This is just the pages that have text or body text that they would read. They do not read any captions, pictures, headers. They only read the body of the text for their practice. You're going to review the pages. The student will you will point out text features. Those are things like those captions, the pictures, the graphs. And in the beginning, you might say, oh, look, I think that we're going to talk about slimy snails because that's what it says here. I wonder what we're going to learn about that. You're just showing them those pages and that those features exist. you're going to have the students skim the text and identify tricky or challenging words. These are words that they don't know, are unsure how to pronounce, or have never seen before and might stumble across. And again, your goal is not to define the word, it's to give them the word. So if they were saying, I don't know what that word with the G at the top is, you would say, oh, that word's getting. Can you say getting for me? Getting. One more time, getting. All right, great. Do you see any other tricky words? You can define it, but you want to build their skills in comprehension. And fluency is a bridge to comprehension. So part of the aspects of the work, and when you think about how you read, you're not pulling out a dictionary or constantly looking up words that are new. You let the text around that word help you to understand what that word means. And that's what the student needs to build that ability to do, to read the text and take those words that first show up as just words on a page and turn them into sentences and paragraphs that make sense. And an example that I like to give in training is a volunteer started out with echo reading, the child read. They did switch off. They did fill in the blank as far as the games. When they got to choral reading at the end, the child laughed because they'd been reading this text all this time, but they weren't comprehending that it was funny. And so before they were reading, they read the words, they read the words, they read the words. But by the time they got to that fourth practice, they were now comprehending what they were reading. And they understood like, oh, this is actually a funny story. It's not just words on the page. That's the goal. You want them to understand that these words connect to sentences, connect to paragraphs, connect to meaning, not just using you as a constant definer of all things that they see. And then you're going to play the fun fluency game. So you identify the pages, you review, point out any text features, they look for challenging words, and then you play the game. So you will have between 3 and 5 games per session in that 12 to 15 minutes. I will do a deep dive into each game tomorrow, but just as a quick review, choral reading is everyone reading together. It's about pacing and keeping up with the natural speaking rate. Switch off is about giving them more miles on the tongue, giving them more practice with the full sentences or the full paragraph or the full section. Dramatic reading is reading with enthusiasm and expression, giving them a better understanding of what they are reading and why you say things with different words. Echo reading is that initial modeling. It's what the game you always start with because you model for them how they should be reading as a fluent reader. Fill in the blank is a chance to practice those tricky and challenging words again, and also to get more practice in the full text. So you want to think about that practice makes permanent. You don't want them practicing any bad habits or bad practices. And so that's why you give them the word accurately. You don't have them say it or practice it incorrectly. If they're reading and they stumble along the word, you want to give them the word correctly because you want them to practice the way that they should be saying it. You want everything that they do to be a permanent best practice. You will get this bookmark, which outlines all of the games and tells you exactly what you're supposed to do for each of them. And you always, as I said, start with echo. If you remember from the on-demand course, the asynchronous course, Bob and Angel started with, he said, oh, we're going to do echo reading. And the kid jumped in to switch off. And if you think about the difference in when they went back and read echo and when he could hear Bob say it and then repeat, the difference it made in the student's ability to know how to read the text accurately. That's the goal. You model and they read back. And I like to think of it as gradual release. You start with you both doing pretty much the same amount of work, and every game you're releasing them a little bit more to do more and more until you get to the end of the session and they have the full independent read that they read by themselves. So my echo, they're reading exactly like you are. Not all of this text is going to be very interesting. In the in-person training, we use the Snails and Slugs book. I can't tell you how many times I've read that Snails and Slugs book. It is not the most exciting book in the pack, let me tell you. And so for you, because you know how to read, because this is not the most exciting topic, hearing that child once again kind of stumble through Snails and Slugs may feel like, oh my goodness, how can we make this exciting? And often I hear from volunteers like, well, aren't they going to get bored? You have to think about any time you've tried to master a skill. When you don't know how to do something, even though you're repeating it 18 million times, you are just focused on trying to get better. You don't care that you're playing the same chord over and over, that you're doing the same stitch over and over. You're trying to get that muscle memory so you can do it without thinking. That is the same for our kids. They're trying to get that automaticity so that they can see any word and they know how to read it. They can constantly read. For them, something that is kind of boring to you is a exercise in focus and trying to figure out how to read that next word. And so getting that practice again is not boring. They're working at it. They're stretching. They're trying. And so you want to be excited that you get to read again. So after they're done reading that one go around with echo, oh my goodness, you did so good echoing me. Let's see if we can take turns and you will kind of do the first round and then I'll do, and let's see who can read each sentence the best, right? Like, I'm so excited to get to practice again, even though snails and slugs are not that interesting. You want to think about each game as a repetition. And this is most important with fill in the blank and switch off. So whoever is reading is doing the most work. So with echo, you both are reading the full text, and you want to make sure that the child gets a chance to practice the entire text. So if you are doing switch off, they will start a turn where they're first and then you are second. Then the next round, you would go first and they would go second. By the time you've completed that, they have read the full section in practice, and that counts as one game. Not you doing a round and them doing a round is two. It's one full game when both of you have a turn. The same is true with fill in the blank. They will serve once as the person who reads and picks the point where you stop to choose the word, and then switch off, and you will be the person that reads, and then you give them the words. That counts as one game. So if you are doing echo and then fill in the blank and then switch off, it's going to feel like you're doing 5 games, but it's really only 3. 1 echo, 2 rounds of fill in the blank, 2 rounds of switch off reading, 3 games. You want to try to end with switch off for a large section for independent read, or you can give them the full section as an independent read. Just look at your timing, look at where you have with playing, but ultimately you want to end the session with them having a chance to read the full section, or 2 to 4 pages, whatever you've identified, having the full time to read. And that's when you pay attention to if they sound fluent. Are they reading like they speak? If they are, great. Next week or next time you see them, you're going to do the exact same number of pages. If they are really stumbling and they do not sound how they talk, they still are inaccurate, or they're really staccato reading words, not reading sentences, they're not fluent. And so you need to decrease the number of pages. So if they were on 4, maybe you go down to 3. If it was really bad, you might go down to 2. And it is okay if you only do 1 page, if you have a student who is really struggling. And you might see that switch. There might be some books where they really struggle through and it's 1 page every session. And then there's some books where, like, I just picked up the rhythm. These are words that I've seen before. I'm really into snails, so I knew these things ahead of time. So I'm just reading through it. You will see those changes, but it's up to you to pay attention, and you'll become expert in this. I know right now it probably feels like, how would I know? What's fluent? What does that mean? But you'll listen, you'll hear the child and you're like, that's not how he talks. That doesn't meet the check. We're going to need to get more practice. Or, wow, he did really great today. He was doing so well. I think we can do this again next week. You will become the knowledge space to this. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the skill building one. We'll talk a little bit about preparing for the session, what you should be thinking and doing during and after and before the reading, and then again, thinking about the fluency games. So,
Panera, we
yes.
did have a question here that probably we could do
Sure.
before this.
Yeah.
Lori, is there a reason the books are all nonfiction?
Yes. Give me 1 second. So you are breaking up the text, and so you might pick 2 pages or 4 pages to read. And one of the things that we want to do is build comprehension. When the program was first established, we found that with the fiction text, it was really hard for them to comprehend because stories build, right? Like you have the introduction, then you have the climax and like the plot point. And so by breaking it up into 2 to 4 pages, it was affecting a little bit the comprehension in the practice because they keep reading and they're like, well, what is going on with the princess? They wouldn't remember that from the session the next time, or they might not get it in, maybe they did a lot of practice in one page, but then they didn't need as much practice in another. And so it makes the story difficult in fiction books. Whether it's nonfiction, it's facts and information, and easier to take in little bits and chunks of the information without it messing up the comprehension. Whatever is typically in that sentence or in that page is enough. And so it just makes more sense to be able to use nonfiction for just practicing. You model with the fiction books in the tutor read aloud. And there, even though you're still breaking it up, it's not about practicing, it's about showing the love of reading, sharing the love of reading. And so by using the fiction in the tutor read aloud, they not only get the joy of just hearing you read to them, but it's also a story. They get to be involved, and you can use that if you don't get through it to be like, what do you think is going to happen next time, to build on their thinking. Practice. Sometimes when you're practicing, if you think of like a singer, they're not going to sing the whole beautiful melody to practice. They're going to sing just a few chords or some stretching exercises. And that isn't necessarily good comprehension in a story. So that's kind of the background. I hope, yes, Laura, you said it makes sense. Well, good. I'm glad I explained that. As I talked more, it seemed like I was making it more convoluted. So I'm glad it was helpful. But that's such a great question. And not every program does this. The Arizona programs are pretty consistent in using nonfiction. I know some of the other sites do not, and I'm happy to kind of pay attention to what happens this year as they have a mix of fiction and nonfiction, but that's what we have found to be true, is that the nonfiction books are better for the practice. So speaking of which, you're going to want to prepare ahead of time to read through your 2 to 4 pages. You'll identify before you start the session, before you meet with the student, and I'm not talking about like hours before, it can be just 3 or 4 minutes before you log on, look and say, okay, last week we did pages 1 through 4. He was fluent by the end of the session. I think we can do 5 through 9 today without any problem. Read those pages, especially because it is nonfiction. Sometimes those words are a little bit complicated or things you haven't necessarily seen. I know in the Snails and Slugs, there's this word mollusks that I struggle through every single time. You want to be prepared to say it and speak it again so it sounds fluent. You'll be ahead of time familiar with the text features so that you know to point them out and what you might say. And you always want to have all your materials already available. Just like you don't want to send them in their house looking for anything, you don't want to walk away from the computer screen because who knows what will happen while you're gone. Best to be completely prepared. And again, having the confidence around what is expected of you. So before you start reading the practice session, you might review or revisit previously read information. You might ask them, do you remember what we talked about last time? If it's a brand new book, this is your chance to introduce the topic. Have you ever heard, do you know the difference between a snail and a slug? Do you know what that is even? What do you know about them? And then of course, then the student identifies the tricky words. That's always before they begin reading, because you want them to know and practice permanent. Whatever's right, you want them to get that practice before they jump into the text. So we're going to show Alicia and Owen doing this part of the session. If you can hear, give me a thumbs up.
Okay, so do you remember the name of the book that we started yesterday?
Owls Overhead.
That's right.
Great.
Do you have your pencil? You got it. So yesterday we read page 4. You read page 4. And today we're going to start with page 5. Okay, so you know the routine. You're going to read to yourself. And if there's any tricky words there, highlight them and we'll talk about it.
Okay. Circle them.
Whatever you want.
find my book.
Page 5, please.
5.
Okay. Take a look, see if there's anything you might need help with.
Is this one continent?
Yes. Good job. That's a tricky one. Excellent.
I thought it because it said continent.
That's just what good readers do. You broke it down into chunks, into parts, into beats. Okay, so you're erasing it because it wasn't really tricky.
Just circling it so you can see.
Oh, is there another one that I didn't see?
Nope.
So, wow, that's pretty good because there's 3.
Do you know that big word, Arctic? I know how to spell it because I've heard of it before, and like many times I've wanted to go there and stuff because it's really snowing.
Well, you know, there's more parts to it than Arctic. If you look at the little chunks, there's the word Antarctica. Antarctica.
Antarctica.
Yeah, pretty long one. So, any others?
Nope, but
Nope.
I haven't heard of these names. Long-eared owls.
Now we're getting into seeing different species of owls.
Owl. Do you know, like, on the first page, page 4, what's the name of the owl?
Tawny.
Tawny?
Tawny. Tawny is a color. It's a shade of brown. So it's a certain kind of brown owl, tawny.
Yeah.
All right. So example of 2 things with Owen. He's obviously showed you the more visual, the showing her of the words, but also the auditory where he kind of underlined it and said, did you see this page that this word that starts with Arctic? I know that word. So you kind of have to guess sometimes or kind of pick out where they might be. 2 examples, he said continent in the way that he probably had learned. I knew it because it was continent, and that's how I knew it was continent. She can say that back to him, and she did explain, yep, that's what good readers do. They break down words to figure it out. Not her responsibility to break it down, though. So when he said the word Arctic, and she's like, no, that's not the full word. See, it's Antarctica. She shouldn't have broken it down. She should have just said, no, that's not the full word. That word is Antarctica. Can you say that for me? Antarctica. Because you want him to practice saying the full word fluently, not breaking it into beats with you. And so, because you don't want to break it incorrectly if you're not sure where you should stop. And also, our goal is to get them to sound like they speak. And you don't say Antarctica, you say Antarctica. So those are 2 things that I would have her change or explain. Owen also went back. They're just doing 1 page. They're just doing page 5, and he went to page 4 to look for tawny. And she then defined it. I do think it's okay that she defined tawny because long-eared and tawny are not anywhere near, you know, it's an adjective and a descriptor of the type of owl, but I might think tawny is similar to long-eared. And so by saying that means brown, she could clarify that pretty clearly for him because I'm not sure he could have figured that out by the text. However, I wouldn't go back to the day before. I would make sure that he knows we're just going to be reading from page 5 today, Owen, but that word is tawny. Can you say tawny for me? Tawny. Great. All right, so let's go back to page 5. As much as possible, keep them redirected, but you can define, give them words if they're uncertain. And her praise was very specific. That's what good readers do. They break down words to figure them out. When he said continent, all of those were really great aspects of it. And Owen showed her pencil and all that he was ready. You can have the child do that to make sure, if you just kind of want to establish that you need to have all these things, especially in the first couple weeks. It can be like, do you have your book? Do you have the same book that I have? Do you have the pen? All of those things can be reasonable, especially when you're dealing with first, second, or third graders who need to get used to the structure. So you will be responsible for explaining the games to the child. And so you'll want to, in the very beginning, review the game directions. Eventually, I would say probably in a month, all of you will be masters of this, you and the child. But in the beginning, you're going to have to say, we're going to start with echo reading. Do you remember what that means? It's where you say what I say. You say it back to me like an echo. You might have to say you're going to underline or circle those tricky words. But after a while, they'll get used to that structure. And so you'll review the games. You want to play 3 to 5. You will pick the order after echo based upon what you think would be best for the student. And we'll talk about that more in that selection, tomorrow. And then, as I've said, always, always, always begin with echo reading. If you need any reminder, remember Bob and how different it sounded when they started with switch off compared to when he read it with echo. It really makes a difference for them to hear you first. And so you always think at the beginning, the first person who's going to read this is me. They will start after. It's gradual release. Over time, you let them go with more. So you always want to correct a student's mispronunciation. No practice of bad habits or incorrect sayings. So that word is correct. Can you say correct for me? Correct. Thanks. Start back at the beginning of the sentence. If they're in the reading and they're messing up, you want them to start back at the beginning of the sentence. You want them to practice fluently reading the full sentence, not stopping on that word. So give them the word, give it to them again, start over at the beginning. And then the more they can read, the more you can get that demonstration of fluency. So before you wrap up that 15 minutes or that fluency fun games, try to figure out something that will give them a longer read. It could be switch off page by page or paragraph by paragraph, or it can be a complete independent read of the session. You decide what makes the most sense based upon where they are at the time. Just like Alicia did, you want to utilize specific praise. This is going to be 30 minutes twice a week. After a while, good job gets really redundant. So you're going to want to pull out your thesaurus and think of all the wonderful ways that you can give praise and being very specific. That's what good readers do. They chunk the word. Oh my goodness, I can't believe you figured out that word continent. That is so many letters. That was great. Figuring out different ways to give them praise is so important. We are really on time today. Carol does have some questions from the early session, so I will move into that section. I do want to just take a temperature read. If you all want to type things in the chat, but I'd love to know kind of how you're feeling. Are we thumbs up? Are we thumbs down at this point? And if you're feeling thumbs up, what are some of the things you're feeling pretty comfortable about? If you have any challenges or concerns, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. So I'm seeing some good thumbs up, which makes me feel like I've met my measure, which is good. But if you do have any challenges, this is a time to ask them. We have more than enough time for question and answer. Great. I'm seeing that the structure makes people feel good. And yes, the importance of preparation. I very much suggest reading the little section before you start your session, particularly because it is nonfiction. And sometimes it's new words to us as well. Oh, good. We've lost some anxiety, which is what I wanted, removing all those ones from the very beginning. Good, good, good. And any questions, feel free to do that.
Okay, so Tanera, we had a couple in here that we
Yeah.
didn't get to. Alan asked how he can get a digital copy or a print copy. I can answer the print copy. We are in the process of putting those together for each of the tutors. And if you come and help at the event next week, you will get your copies then for each of your children that you are working with. And if you want a digital copy, we are having a workshop on that on the 21st of this month. with Amber Kent, our library manager. So she will go over how to use the digital library a little bit, where to get them digitally if you'd like. So that's hopefully Alan will give you a little bit of an answer for that. Sue did talk about how parents knows it's a 30-minute session. Sue, that's also, we put that in our parent app, our child application and parent notes when we send that out. And that goes out this week. The teachers will be sending that out to the parents when they're doing their parent-teacher conferences this week. So, and then we'll also send it out again in the packets on just a kind of a student reading readiness guide is what we are sending out with them. And you said we're gonna do the monitoring one tomorrow, right?
Yes, it's in the end of the session, but basically the key thing is that you never want to enter the room, just you and the child. You'll always want there to be 2 adults for every child, so the child is not let into the room until the monitor is there, or the monitor does not let the child in until the tutor is there. Either way, 2 adults, 1 child.
And this is a good one. Wanda asked, on the first day, will we spend more than 3 minutes getting to know the student or stick to them? And that kind of led into one question from this morning. How strict is that timeline, that 30-minute timeline?
Absolutely. So the first 2 sessions, you actually should not do the session structure after I spent all this time emphasizing that. You're going to spend the day getting to know, the 30 minutes getting to know them. So you'll be given a little bit of an icebreaker form to ask things like, what's your favorite color? What do you like to do? What are your hobbies? So that you can also integrate that into the reading. Oh, you know, look, that's pink. That's your favorite color. That's great. And this is also that mentoring piece so that you can know who you're meeting. They can know a little bit about you and why you want to volunteer and what you love about reading. You know, you might want to figure out what your favorite book is and things like that to be able to share with them. But the first session is just getting to know them. The first and second session, you do not do the structure, and it's just about explaining expectations, goals, and getting to know the student. So you might go through the games, you might pull up the book and do that you're going to start with and do a book walk, which means you talk about, oh, do you see the cover? And oh, look at the table of contents. And oh, here's a picture of this on page 3. And there's a whole glossary at the end. You don't read any of the practice, but you will give them an exploration and introduction to the text. And then you'll go through each game. You know, Echo is, we're going to always start with games to do practice. And first you're going to do Echo every time. And that means this. And then there's this game, this game, this game. And then you'll talk through kind of what the tutor read aloud, and you will read aloud to them. You can do that at the end of the session. So still 30 minutes, not the structure. You'll basically do a very long opening and the tutor read aloud and closing. And the second session is an opening, maybe a little bit longer, walking them through the expectations, the structure in the sense of what will happen the next time. Pick out the book, let them see what the activities are. Maybe say, we're going to start with page 1 through 4 next week. And you're going to read and show them exactly or explain to them what the games are. And you want to figure out some ways to talk about the games in childlike language. So, you know, Echo means you're going to say exactly back to me what I say. So I'm going to read, and then you're going to read the exact same way. You know, switch off, we're each going to take turns. I'm going to read a sentence, and then you're going to read a sentence. So I'll read from the first word all the way to the first period, and you'll read the next one. For fill in the blank, I'm going to read, and then I'm going to tap, or we'll talk about more other ways to get their attention. And then that's when you give me the word. And then we'll take a turn, and you'll read, and you'll tell me when to choose the word. So you want to think through those games in a way that they'll understand. You probably still will have to repeat and remind them in the first couple of sessions, but definitely by the first month, they're like, can we do switch off? Can we do this? They understand what the expectation is. There was a question about who ends the session.
Yeah, who ends the session? And then also remember Kevin's question from this morning is about using a timer.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. So the timing is it is a 30-minute. You don't want to go over the 30-minute because you will have another session and you want to give yourself space for that. I do think that you can have a clock that you're paying attention to, or the clock on your computer that you pay attention to, like, okay, I started at 3:30, by 3:50 I should be through the games, I should be in reflection. And so if you see that, you know, you might have a silent timer that goes off to you in the beginning, just to give you a sense, because it will go fast in the beginning, faster than you expect. But I don't think having a loud timer is good. I think it's distracting, and none of these are hard and fast in the sense that, like, exactly at 15 minutes you should stop. It's that you have about 24 minutes. Your opening and your closing some days might be just a minute long. It might be 4 minutes long. That's okay. The only place that I would say that you don't want to spend too much time is your tutor read aloud as a replacement for games. Ultimately, the more games you get to play, the better. The person who's doing the most reading that day is doing the most work. So if your games went longer and your review and reflection typically will take like 2 or 3 minutes, and you only have 4 minutes to read, it's 4 minutes. It's okay. You shouldn't, like, oh, stop early just so that you get the full tutor read aloud time. It's just to share the joy of reading, and it's not expected that you will finish a book, even a very simple book, in one session. It might be that it takes 2 sessions to get through, or 3 sessions, depending on how thick the book is, and that's okay. And who ends the session is not the student. It can be the monitor or the tutor. The child will leave, and then the 2 of you can decide who hits end, but it shouldn't be the student.
And so another question from this morning was, are sessions back to back? And for the most part, yes, because the schools have only given us an hour time frame in which to do the tutoring sessions. The other question we had, if the student isn't fluent, I'm sorry, not frequent, I can't read my own writing. If the student isn't fluent during the session, can you repeat the content?
Right. No. So this is about practice, not perfection. And so if at the end of the section you listen and they don't sound like how they talk, your goal is to adjust the next session. They're not going to go back to get perfect at that section. It's just moving forward with less content to practice. And you go down and down until you're at 1 page, and that's what they practice. If they are fluent, stay. Don't keep going bigger, no more than 4 pages at a time, because you do want to give them enough practice. And 4 pages in Reading A to Z is about enough practice for this grade level in a 30-minute session. And so you will adjust down if they're just not fluent by the end. And again, your measure of that at the end is their independent read and listening for them to read how they speak. So someone is asking about, do you read the entire book at one time? So you're going to break it into 4s, or however the number of pages might make sense to you. And so when they get to the very end, it may be at the end of the session. So you're not going to do it at that time, but your next goal is to have them do 2 independent reads. This is how you know if you continue up a level or if you stay in that level. So say this is the 2nd book in level L, and when you read it, you finished all your sessions. Now it's Johnny's time to do an independent read. They read the book from cover to cover all by themselves, and you're listening for fluency. If they make more than 5 errors, have them read it again. Give them another chance to read it from cover to cover. And if this time they still make more than 5 errors, and there's a little bit of gray, if it's 6 and it wasn't that huge, you might be able to let them go on to the next level. But if they make 15 errors, you're staying in level L. You're not going up to level M, right? LM, yes. If they do okay, and this was your 2nd book in level L, then you're ready to go to M, and the next time you come together, you'll be in level M. So there are 2 books each level. You do need to do, there's more than 2 options, right, Carol? Or is there only 2 options?
No, there's 2.
That's it?
Yeah. There's
Huh.
two levels in each. I mean, 2 books in each level.
Just 2 options.
Right.
And so should they stay in the same level then, though? Wouldn't they have another option? I will get back to you tomorrow. I'm going to answer this question with the ARP folks. But
Yeah, that's a good idea.
yeah, you should have, you should stay in that level once you've gone through, and if they're not fluent. And fluency is just 5 or less errors. And an error would count as like a very staccato stumble through a word, skipping a word, mixing up or not reading it accurately. You want to think of that accuracy piece. It should sound like how they're speaking, and it should be pretty accurate.
Okay, one of the other questions
They
we
would
had
never
was,
stay.
oh.
If they stay in the same level, they read the same book. They would not read the same book. That's why I'm asking that question.
Okay.
So I will get that answered for you tomorrow. Is my understanding usually there's more options at the level. So I will clarify if maybe there's an expectation that you would just do one and move up, and so then you do the second book. But typically there's another option for you to choose. But I'll answer that question for you first thing in the morning.
Okay. And then we had that one question, the Miss Carol or Miss Chase, which one you'd have the child use with the tutor?
Yes. Right. So Carol's name is Carol Chase. And so some schools, most schools, students are calling their teacher by their last name with a signature salutation. There we go. Mr., Miss, Mrs., Mix on in front of their last name. And so there isn't a policy from Casa Grande about what is the preference, but I personally believe that you should follow what the school does. And I'm a little old school, so I would be Miss Bailey. If you really feel like it is something you want to advocate for, come to Carol and make a case about why you want to be by your first name. But if your school is using last names, I would most likely err on being consistent with what the other adults that are educating them are doing.
We have, Wanda, you've been in with the schools for a long time. What do they prefer? Can you unmute? Wanda? Yeah.
When I was there, they just got to call me Miss Wanda.
They did. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I was in with first graders, and then I was in with fourth graders at Desert Willow. So, but that was what Desert Willow did.
Okay. So we might need to clarify by school.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank
or
you.
even with the teacher or,
Mm-hmm.
so you might want to set a policy, Carol.
Yes, I will do that.
So we'll
All right.
figure
So
out
I
what
think
the
that's all of the questions from this morning. If you want to go on with the rest of yours, I think that'll
Great.
answer.
So there's a few that we know are frequently asked questions, so I'll go through those. Do we need to play all of the games each time? No, you do not. You just need to play between 3 and 5 games. And remember, the games equals the repetitions. And so if you do echo, you do fill in the blank, and then you do switch off by sentence, and then you he still needs a little more practice. I'm going to do switch off by paragraph. That counts as another repetition if you do both rounds of switch off 2 times. Does that make sense? And each game has a purpose, and we'll really dive into that tomorrow, but you're listening to what the student needs and making a decision of where you should spend the time practicing. And sometimes the student will be doing better, and so you'll get through more. I've definitely seen tutors who've been able to have 8 or 9 games in the session, and I've seen times where that 3rd game was a struggle. It just depends on the student and their progress. You definitely should not be teaching students to sound out words. Give them the word, say it accurately, have them repeat it, and then give it to them again. If it's a word in a sentence, have them start at the beginning of the sentence. If they want to sound it out, definitely they can do that. But you should not be teaching them to sound out words, even if you know how, because you're an educator. And should we spend a lot of time providing definitions for vocabulary words that come up during reading? Again, you want them to build that muscle of being able to figure out the context of the word in the sentence or in the text and get the definition from that. That does not mean that you can't define it, just like I gave the example with Alicia and Tawny. I think that would have been a little bit challenging, and it was okay to give it quickly and keep moving. But if you remember from the video, Bob ran into a little bit of trouble trying to define reproduce to his first grader, and you don't want to be in that same place. So using just the word and giving them the word tends to be easy, and then say, well, let's see if we can figure out what that means by reading around it. Okay. And if they still don't, then you can give it to them. But I feel like you want to err on the side of not giving definitions. So to wrap up today, we talked a lot about who we are and what we do, this framework for tutoring, and then this opening and just a brief introduction to the Fluency Fun Games. Tomorrow, more in-depth, deep dive into each game, the purpose, what it looks like. You'll get to see Owen and Alicia again and hear some best practices or feedback on each game that they play. We'll talk about how you reflect on the session and encourage the student to use that time to boost their comprehension and remember what they learned. And we'll talk about the tutor read aloud and the closing. I want to thank you all for some time that you gave me today and for all your questions, which are really helpful. I will answer the question about the book. I'll figure out an answer tonight so that I can answer you all tomorrow. If there's any questions, please feel free. We still have a few minutes and I'll stay on. Don't forget to fill out the survey. Carol put it in the chat. They do use that to help us improve the training or add things to it that might help with your learning. And you will get another one for tomorrow. So there's a survey for each day of the training that's led by a master trainer. But again, thank you all so much for giving me your time, your questions. You were so prepared that we just zoomed through all the content. So I'm excited to jump in again tomorrow and to be able to hopefully answer any questions you might have. If in the middle of the night you wake up with a question on the top of your mind, feel free to email it to Carol and she'll give it to me and we can make sure that we answer them in the session. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon or evening at this point.
Was taking your picture, guys. So just getting a little snapshot. Yes, making sure you guys all are still awake. Thank you, Tanera, for doing that training today. You guys, let's show her thumbs up and some claps, or you can do exclamation marks in the chat. But Tanera went to a lot of trouble and she's doing 2 of these a day for us. So we really appreciate her taking the time to do that and hope you guys got a lot out of it. We are doing the book bags on Thursday from 9 to noon here at the library. If you want to, make sure you bring your mask so we can practice our social distancing and everything. And Q sent out a link about our calendar today, so he sent you out an email. So don't forget to take a look at your email today. And thank you again for spending some time with us this afternoon. We will see you again tomorrow. Adios, you guys. Bye-bye.